The Valax Dreadnought, a hulking mass of bad decisions and worse intentions, loomed in the viewport like the universe's worst party crasher. Its blackened hull was a quilt of scars, each one a testament to a negotiation gone wrong or a pirate raid that got too ambitious. "Charming," Mordecai Vance muttered, adjusting the collar of his diplomatic uniform. It was the kind of outfit that screamed, "I come in peace, but I'm not above threatening you with bureaucratic red tape." His assistant, a perpetually unimpressed woman named Teresa, snorted beside him. "Charming like a back-alley dentist with a rusty drill. Don't knock it till you try it," Mordecai replied. "Who knows, maybe they'll roll out the red carpet." "More like a red stain," Teresa said dryly. "And I doubt it's from wine." The shuttle docked with a shudder that suggested it was only held together by the pilot's sheer willpower and a prayer to any gods that might be listening. Mordecai hated interstellar travel. It was either too slow or too fast, and always the wrong temperature. He missed Earth, with its predictable weather and overpriced coffee. The airlock hissed open, releasing a gust of stale air that smelled faintly of burnt toast and industrial cleaner. "Welcome to the Valax Dreadnought," Mordecai said, affecting his best tour guide voice. "Please keep your hands and feet inside the vehicle at all times and try not to make eye contact with the locals." Their welcoming committee consisted of a trio of Valax delegates. They had the kind of faces only a mother could love, assuming she was blind and had no sense of smell. Their skin had the pallor of something that had never seen the sun and didn't care to. The lead delegate, a stringy creature with too many limbs and a disconcerting number of eyes, stepped forward. "Human," it said, managing to invest that single word with all the warmth of a frozen wasteland. "Mordecai Vance, I presume." "The very same," Mordecai replied, extending a hand. "And you are?" The Valax looked at his hand like he'd offered it a dead rat. "I am Sklith, negotiator for the consortium." "Charmed," Mordecai said. He retracted his hand, making a mental note to sanitize it later. "I believe we have some business to discuss." "Indeed," Sklith replied. "Follow me. Try not to get lost. Our ship is not forgiving to intruders." "Oh, I bet," Teresa muttered under her breath as they trailed after the delegates. The corridors were a maze of intersecting passageways, all decorated in the same tasteful shade of impending doom. "Nice decor," Mordecai commented. "I especially like the skull motifs. Very inviting." "They are trophies," Sklith said, with the kind of pride reserved for someone who collected unpaid parking tickets. "From those who refused to negotiate." "Well, in that case, I'm glad I wore my brown pants," Mordecai quipped, earning a stifled laugh from Teresa. They finally reached a chamber that could generously be described as the conference room, if one was willing to overlook the fact it looked more like a dungeon refitted for a particularly gruesome board meeting. A long metal table, scarred and pitted, dominated the center. "Please," Sklith gestured to the seats opposite. "Sit." Mordecai slid into one of the chairs, trying not to think about what might be staining the cushion. Teresa took the seat next to him, her expression a masterclass in sardonic detachment. "So," Mordecai said, leaning back with an air of nonchalance he didn't entirely feel, "let's talk about peace." "Peace," echoed Sklith, as if it were a new word it was trying out for the first time. "We are willing to consider your proposals, but we have some stipulations." "Of course you do," Teresa muttered, earning a sharp look from the Valax. "Silence your subordinate," Sklith hissed, a hint of menace in its voice. "Sorry," Mordecai said, not sounding the least bit apologetic. "She's got a mind of her own. Comes with the territory of being human. Now, about those stipulations?" Sklith leaned forward, its multiple eyes narrowing. "Your people must withdraw from our claimed sectors." "That's not going to happen," Mordecai said, matching its stare with the kind of deadpan delivery he'd perfected over years of dealing with obstinate bureaucrats and angry clients. Sklith's eyes widened, then blinked in sequence like a malfunctioning traffic light. "Then we have no deal." "You didn't let me finish," Mordecai said, drumming his fingers on the table. "In exchange for withdrawing, we'd need something in return." "What could you possibly want?" Sklith asked, the disdain in its voice palpable. "Oh, I don't know," Mordecai replied airily. "How about a little thing called, not getting vaporized?" There was a tense pause, during which Mordecai could almost hear Teresa's eyes rolling in exasperation. "Your threats do not intimidate us," Sklith said, voice dripping with contempt. "Good," Mordecai replied, grinning like a fox in a henhouse. Because that wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The silence stretched on, thick and heavy as wet cement. "We will consider your terms," Sklith said finally, its voice a grudging growl. "But do not think you have the upper hand, human." "Wouldn't dream of it," Mordecai said, flashing a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. The meeting ended with a perfunctory exchange of pleasantries that barely passed for civil. As they made their way back to the shuttle, Teresa shook her head. "Peace talks with the Valax," she said. "It's like trying to negotiate with a rabid dog." "Yeah," Mordecai agreed, "but even rabid dogs can be tamed. Or at least muzzled. And if they can't, then you put them down," Mordecai said, a hint of steel in his voice. The shuttle door sealed shut, and as they undocked, Mordecai felt a knot of tension uncoil in his stomach. He glanced out the viewport, watching the Dreadnought recede into the void. "So," Teresa said, breaking the silence, "you think they'll play ball?" "Not a chance," Mordecai replied with a grin that belied the gravity of the situation. "But it's fun to pretend." Teresa chuckled, shaking her head. "You're a real piece of work, you know that? That's why you keep me around," Mordecai said, settling back into his seat as the shuttle made the jump to hyperspace. The universe streaked by in a blur of stars, and Mordecai allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The Valax were a problem, sure, but they were just one piece of a much larger puzzle. And if there was one thing Mordecai excelled at, it was putting pieces together in ways no one else could anticipate. He leaned back, closing his eyes, the shuttle's hum lulling him into a light doze. There'd be more meetings, more threats, more chances for everything to go spectacularly wrong. But that was tomorrow's problem. For now, there was just the silence of space and the knowledge that, against all odds, he'd survived another day in the galaxy's most cutthroat profession. And that, as far as Mordecai was concerned, was a victory worth savoring. The shuttle ride back to the Valax Dreadnought was about as enjoyable as hugging a cactus, a sentiment not lost on Mordecai Vance as he reflected on his brief stint in hyperspace. But now, as he stood in the conference room that doubled as a set for a horror movie, he felt the weight of the galaxy settle back on his shoulders. "Peace talks," Mordecai muttered, mostly to himself. They were like trying to teach a cat to fetch, mostly pointless and likely to end in a hissy fit. "Keep telling yourself that," Teresa said, her voice dry as a martini left out in the sun. "Maybe you'll believe it someday." Mordecai glanced sideways at her. "You know, I could really use a little optimism." Teresa snorted. "Optimism's great. It's the perfect thing to have right before you drive off a cliff." "Speaking of cliffs," Mordecai said, turning his attention to the Valax representative, who had a name with more syllables than he had patience for. "Shall we dive into these talks before my coffee wears off?" The Valax negotiator, who Mordecai had mentally dubbed Eight Eyes, blinked all its respective eyes in what he assumed was a form of nodding. "Proceed, human." Mordecai took a breath, opening his mouth to deliver another session of diplomatic banter when the lights flickered, and the sound of a gunshot cracked through the room like the universe's worst joke. Mordecai frowned, glancing down at the fresh, crimson stain blooming on his chest. "Well," Mordecai said, almost conversationally, as he stumbled backwards. "That's inconvenient." He hit the floor with the grace of a sack of potatoes, the world around him spiraling into a chaos of panicked shouts and blaring alarms. Somewhere above him, he heard Teresa curse with a fervor that would make a sailor blush. "Mordecai," she yelled, dropping to her knees beside him. "You can't just die on me now. We've got a schedule to keep." Mordecai wanted to answer, maybe with a quip about how his schedule was suddenly a lot more open, but his vision tunneled, and the world faded to black. When he came to, the first thing he noticed was the headache. It was the kind of pain that suggested someone had rented space in his skull and was throwing a rave. The second thing was the ceiling, a dull, metallic gray that seemed to pulse in time with his migraine. "Welcome back to the land of the living." Teresa's voice cut through the fog, her tone equal parts relief and exasperation. "Did I miss anything good?" Mordecai croaked, his voice sounding like it had been dragged through gravel. "Just the usual panic and accusation," Teresa said, helping him sit up. They were in a cramped, dimly lit room, temporary quarters, likely, while the situation was sorted out. Or while someone decided whether to blame them for the assassination attempt. "Great," Mordecai muttered, rubbing his temples. "Because that's exactly what I needed today." "The Valax think we did it," Teresa continued, her sardonic tone a balm against the insanity. Shocking, I know. Of course they do, Mordecai sighed. Because nothing says, peaceful delegation, like shooting the negotiator. Teresa smirked. Maybe they think humans show affection through attempted murder. Only on weekends, Mordecai said, managing a weak smile. He took stock of the room, a cot, a table, and a single flickering light bulb. It was a step up from a prison cell, but not by much. So, what's the plan, fearless leader? Teresa asked, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. Plan? Mordecai echoed. I was hoping you had one. I'm just the guy who gets shot. Figures, Teresa said, shaking her head. Guess we're stuck here until someone decides we're not worth the paperwork to execute. Charming, Mordecai said. He managed to swing his legs over the edge of the cot, testing his balance. Any idea who actually tried to kill me? Teresa shrugged. Could be anyone with a grudge against you, so that narrows it down to everyone we've ever met. Helpful, Mordecai muttered. But she was right. In a universe where every other encounter ended in death threats, potential suspects were as common as overpriced coffee. A chime echoed through the room, and the door slid open to reveal a Valax guard, its expression inscrutable. The council will see you, it said, its voice a grating monotone. Guess that's our cue, Teresa said, offering Mordecai a hand up. Yay, Mordecai deadpanned. More chances to get shot. The guard escorted them through a labyrinth of corridors, all as cheerless and foreboding as a crypt. Mordecai resisted the urge to make a sarcastic comment about the decor. He needed every ounce of diplomacy he had left, which admittedly wasn't much after getting ventilated. They were ushered into a chamber that screamed intimidation, dark, cold, with walls that looked like they'd witnessed more executions than negotiations. The Valax Council lined one side of the room, each member perched like a vulture waiting for something to die. Human, said the central figure, a Valax with markings that Mordecai guessed denoted rank. Explain yourself. Mordecai took a deep breath, hoping the headache wouldn't scramble his words. First off, love what you've done with the place. Really screams, welcome. Secondly, someone tried to assassinate me, which is generally against my usual travel itinerary. A murmur rippled through the council, though whether it was amusement or annoyance, Mordecai couldn't tell. Do you deny involvement? The chief Valax asked, its gaze piercing enough to drill through hull plating. Considering I was the one bleeding out on your floor, yes, Mordecai replied, meeting its gaze with his best impression of sincerity. Unless you think humans have developed a taste for self-inflicted gunshot wounds. A long, tense silence stretched, the kind that made Mordecai long for a stiff drink and a faster ship. The investigation is ongoing, the Valax leader finally said, its tone clipped. Until its conclusion, you and your delegation are confined to your quarters. That's what I call hospitality, Teresa muttered, just loud enough for Mordecai to hear. Mordecai nodded, though he felt less like a diplomat and more like a prisoner. Fine, he said, but you might want to hurry it up. I don't think my itinerary includes dying of boredom. The Valax leader's eyes narrowed. Your flippancy will not serve you here, human. Mordecai shrugged. Flippancy is all I've got right now. They were escorted back to their temporary quarters under the watchful eyes of their Valax guards. The journey was silent except for the faint hum of the ship and Mordecai's stubborn heartbeat. Once back in their cell, Mordecai slumped onto the cot, his body aching with the kind of exhaustion that sleep alone couldn't fix. Well, he said, rubbing his temples again, this is turning into one hell of a business trip. Teresa paced the room, her face a mask of frustration. You think they're going to pin this on us? Mordecai shrugged. Not sure. But if they do, let's hope they're as bad at executions as they are at decorating. Teresa snorted, though her eyes remained clouded with worry. You know you're not supposed to piss off the locals, right? Never been one for the rules, Mordecai said, trying to ignore the throbbing in his side where the bullet had grazed him. Besides, I think they've already made up their minds about us. Teresa sighed, collapsing into a chair. Great, so we just sit here and wait for someone to solve this mess before they decide we're too much trouble to keep alive. Pretty much, Mordecai agreed. But look on the bright side, don't, Teresa interjected. Just don't. They lapsed into silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the hum of the ship continued, a constant reminder of their precarious position in a universe that seemed determined to see them fail. Mordecai leaned back on the cot, staring up at the ceiling and wishing desperately for a way out that didn't involve a body bag. It was the kind of situation that made him long for Earth, with its predictable politics and overpriced coffee. But wishing wouldn't change a thing. They were stuck, trapped in a web of suspicion with no clear path forward. And all Mordecai could do was wait and hope that somewhere, somehow, the truth would come to light before it was too late. He closed his eyes, trying to will himself to sleep despite the odds stacked against him. It was, after all, the only escape he had left. Mordecai lay staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe the universe had a personal vendetta against him. It would certainly explain the bullet he'd taken for the team. Teresa, ever the optimist, had found herself a chair and was now sitting in it like it had personally wronged her, arms crossed, eyes narrow, and jaw clenched. Enter Leora Kessler, junior diplomat, and the newest addition to their merry band of misfits. She burst into their temporary prison quarters with the kind of energy that suggested she hadn't yet been crushed by the weight of intergalactic cynicism. Give her time, Mordecai thought. Everyone breaks eventually. Leora was the kind of person who looked like she took optimism in her coffee, with an extra shot of naivety. Her arrival was accompanied by the usual cheerleader pep talk. Okay, team, we've got a situation, but I'm on it. Great, Leora, Mordecai said, his voice laced with the enthusiasm of a man who'd just woken up in a coffin. I was beginning to worry we might get bored. Teresa glanced up from her glare off with the ceiling. You're on it? What are you, a detective now? Leora looked unperturbed, which was a rare quality in their line of work. I might not be a detective, but I am resourceful. And as it happens, I found something interesting. Mordecai raised an eyebrow. Interesting. As in, we're all going to die, interesting, or, we might actually solve this interesting. A bit of column A, a bit of column B, Leora replied. The Dreadnought's security systems have been tampered with. Someone's pulling the strings behind the curtains. Mordecai massaged his temples. Fantastic. So we've got a third party playing puppeteer. Do we at least know who's holding the strings? Not yet, Leora admitted. But I'm working on it. I've managed to borrow some equipment from the Valax security office. Borrow? Teresa said, her voice dripping with skepticism. And they just let you? Leora grinned, her smile practically a beacon of misplaced confidence. They were busy. I was persuasive. Persuasive, Mordecai repeated. I think that's code for, did something remarkably reckless. Call it a creative problem-solving approach, Leora said, shrugging. Anyway, the security logs showed unauthorized access. Someone's been messing with the cameras and door controls. If we can track their digital footprints, we might narrow down who's behind this. So, you're saying we're in a live-action whodunit, but without the murder mystery dinner? Mordecai asked, wishing he had something stronger than water to drink. More like a whodunit, but with a side of potential execution, Teresa dryly added. Exactly, Leora said, but if we can prove there was a third party involved, we might clear our names before we end up as Valax decoration. Mordecai appreciated the enthusiasm, but he'd been in enough tight spots to know that good intentions were the paving stones of very bad roads. Still, they didn't have many options. All right, Leora, what do you need from us? As much as I love a good solo mission, I could use some help with the technical stuff, Leora said, producing a small device from her pocket. And someone to keep an eye out for Valax guards. They're not exactly fans of human ingenuity. Teresa sighed, pushing herself up from her chair. Fine, I'll play lookout. Mordecai can fiddle with the space gadgets. Great, because my degree in interstellar relations came with a minor in not dying, Mordecai said, taking the device. So, what am I looking at here? Just a little something I put together from the Valax security kit, Leora explained. It's a signal scanner. We can use it to track where the unauthorized accesses came from. Sounds easy enough, Mordecai said, though he knew that easy was usually code for expect everything to go wrong. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, and he had the scars to prove it. They moved quickly, Mordecai and Leora ducking into shadowed alcoves as Teresa stalked ahead, her expression as cheerful as a funeral procession. The corridors of the Valax Dreadnought were a maze of shadows and metallic clinks, the kind of place where you expected a jump scare around every corner. Mordecai fiddled with the scanner as they moved, its small display flickering with streams of data that meant little to him but seemed to delight Leora. Got something, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Looks like the signal originated from the lower decks. Conveniently the most heavily guarded area, Mordecai muttered. Of course, it couldn't be easy. That'd be too much like right. Exactly, Leora replied, her eyes glinting with determination. But that's our lead. We just need to get down there without becoming space dust. Easy, Teresa said sarcastically. We'll just casually stroll past Valax guards who probably think we're the second coming of interstellar Hitler. Mordecai sighed. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, right? With Teresa leading, they made their way through the dreary corridors, the scanners beeping their only guide in the labyrinth of metal and mistrust. They ducked into alcoves and behind crates, their hearts pounding in their chests as they avoided patrols. They finally reached the lower decks, a part of the ship that felt even more foreboding than the rest, not an easy feat, given the general ambiance of doom. The air was colder, and the lighting dimmed to an almost sinister level. All right, Mordecai said, taking a deep breath. Time to play detective. The scanner beeped insistently, pointing them toward a sealed room. Leora approached, typing furiously on a handheld device that looked cobbled together from spare parts. The door slid open with a reluctant hiss, granting them entry to a room filled with monitors and machinery. Looks like someone's been busy, Teresa observed, eyeing the setup. This doesn't scream legitimate operations. Mordecai nodded, moving to examine the displays. This is definitely where they've been controlling the systems from. Can you find anything, Leora? Leora was already at work, her fingers dancing over the controls with the kind of confidence that suggested she'd done this before. Probably somewhere she wasn't supposed to. I'm accessing the logs. Give me a sec. Seconds stretched into minutes, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. Mordecai's mind raced, going through possible scenarios and outcomes, none of them particularly good. Got it, Leora finally said, her voice tinged with triumph. There's a data trail leading to an off-ship account. Whoever's orchestrating this is doing it remotely. Any idea who? Mordecai asked, leaning over her shoulder. Not yet, Leora replied. But if I can decode this encryption, we might have a name. Better hurry, Teresa said, her gaze fixed on the entrance. We've got company. Mordecai turned to see a group of Valax guards approaching, their expressions the kind that suggested a swift and unpleasant end for the trio. Well, this just got interesting. Leora worked furiously, her determination a stark contrast to the impending threat. Almost there, the guards reached the doorway, weapons raised. Mordecai stepped forward, hands raised in what he hoped was a universal gesture of surrender. We're just tourists, here for the sights. The lead guard snorted, a sound that did not bode well for their continued existence. You are trespassing in a restricted area. Funny, I thought we were just lost, Mordecai said, injecting as much charm into his voice as possible. These ships, they all look the same. You will come with us, the guard said, his tone brooking no argument. Mordecai winced. Can't we just talk this out? I've got a killer knock-knock joke. Teresa glared at him. Now's not the time for jokes, Mordecai. On the contrary, he replied, I think it's the perfect time. Leora's voice cut through the tension. Got it, she exclaimed, holding up a device triumphantly. We have a name. Mordecai turned, hope flickering to life. Who is it? Not here, Leora said, her voice urgent. We need to go, now. Agreed, Teresa said, grabbing Mordecai's arm. Let's get out of here before they decide to make us the next exhibit. They backed away slowly, keeping their hands visible as the Valax guards closed in, every step a delicate dance on the edge of disaster. Leora's display showed the name, but Mordecai couldn't see it. Their escape took precedence. With a quick flick of her wrist, Leora engaged a smoke device, filling the room with a thick, obscuring fog. Run! She shouted, and they did, sprinting through the corridors with the urgency of those who knew what awaited them if they didn't make it. They ran, hearts pounding, as alarms blared and the ship's automated systems announced their capture. But Mordecai focused on the endgame, the truth they now held, and the hope that it might just be enough to save them. As they fled through the labyrinthine corridors, Mordecai couldn't help but smile. Because despite the odds, despite the chaos and the danger, they finally had a chance. And that, in his experience, was all they ever really needed. Mordecai sprinted through the dimly lit corridors of the Valax Dreadnought, trying not to choke on the smoke Leora had so helpfully unleashed. He thought about how his life had gotten to the point where sprinting from alien security forces was a regular activity. One part of his brain, probably the part that didn't care about survival, found it all rather amusing. Why does running away always suck so much? Mordecai puffed, narrowly avoiding a collision with a bulkhead. Maybe if you'd lay off the synth burgers, you'd keep up better, Teresa shot back, not even breaking a sweat. Her athleticism was as annoying as it was impressive. Leora was leading the way, her smaller stature making her more adept at dodging obstacles. If you two are done bickering, mind focusing on not getting caught? Oh, are we bothering you, Leora? My apologies, Mordecai retorted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Next time, I'll just let the guards catch us without complaint. Save the sarcasm for when we're not about to be alien barbecue, Leora snapped. They reached another intersection and came to an abrupt halt. The scanner Mordecai held was flashing with alarming frequency. Why's it making that noise? He asked. Because it just figured out we're screwed, Teresa replied, peering over his shoulder. Leora snatched the device from his hands, her expression souring as she scanned the data. The Dreadnought's systems are failing. All those tampered security systems? It's a coordinated attack from within. Great. So not only are we fugitives, we're on a dying ship, Mordecai said. I should have stayed in bed this morning. They ducked into a side corridor just as a new patrol rounded the corner, their footsteps echoing ominously in the metal halls. Mordecai pressed his back against the cold bulkhead, his heart hammering in his chest. You find out who's behind it? Leora nodded, her expression grim. It's an insurgent faction within the Valax. They oppose the peace treaty. Guess they're not fans of group hugs and singing, Kumbaya. Peace, love, and understanding not their style, huh? Mordecai quipped. Figures. Wouldn't want to make things too easy. Nope, Leora said, tapping her device frantically. And now their sabotage is going to take us all out. Teresa peeked around the corner, her eyes scanning for any sign of the enemy. We've got to warn the others on the ship. Even if we're not exactly on their Christmas card list, they don't deserve to go down with us. Or we could just find a nice escape pod and make for the nearest bar, Mordecai suggested, only half joking. But even as he said it, he knew they wouldn't leave without trying to stop the disaster. Mordecai had a bad habit of getting involved in lost causes. It was either his greatest virtue or his most damning flaw. Probably both. All right, Leora said, taking a deep breath. We need to get to the command center. The only way to stop this is to override the system from there. Perfect. All we have to do is waltz right into the most secure part of the ship. Easy as pie, Mordecai said, earning a glare from Teresa. Got a better plan? She asked. Sadly, no, Mordecai admitted. I suppose we should get moving before we all become part of a Valax fireworks show. They moved deeper into the ship, navigating the increasingly chaotic environment. The failing systems caused the lights to flicker sporadically, adding to the ambiance of impending doom. If Mordecai didn't know better, he'd think he was in a horror hollow flick waiting for the big scare. As they approached the command center, Mordecai couldn't help but mutter, I feel like the universe is playing a very cruel prank on us. That's life, Leora replied. Just one big cosmic joke with us as the punchline. Except this punchline might involve us exploding, Mordecai added. Teresa stopped them at a final corridor, her posture tense. We're close. Can you get us in, Leora? Leora nodded, her focus entirely on her task. I think so. Gimme a sec. She fiddled with her device, connecting to the Dreadnought's systems in a way that was definitely not authorized. Mordecai glanced around nervously, waiting for the inevitable security team to show up and ruin their day. We're in, Leora said, her voice barely audible over the alarms that had started blaring. The door to the command center slid open with a reluctant creak, revealing a room filled with alien tech and a few very surprised Valax officers. Mordecai stepped in, hands raised in a gesture of peace that was as sincere as a used ship salesman's promise. Hi there, he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. We're here to save your scaly butts. The officers looked at each other, confusion giving way to anger. You have no authority here, one of the Valax snapped. True, but you also don't have a ship that's going to be flying much longer, Leora said, stepping forward. Your systems are compromised. We're here to help fix it. The Valax hesitated, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Mordecai took advantage of the pause. Listen, you don't have to trust us, but you should definitely trust that your ship is about to become space debris. Finally, one of the officers stepped aside, allowing Leora access to the central console. You have one chance, the Valax said, their voice a mix of reluctance and desperation. No pressure, Teresa said, watching Leora with a mix of anxiety and hope. Leora dove into her work, her fingers moving like a blur over the alien controls. Mordecai watched, feeling as useless as a damp matchstick on a rainy day. He hated not being able to help, but hacking alien systems wasn't in his skill set. His expertise lay more in running away and occasional witty banter. Got it, Leora said, looking up with a triumphant gleam in her eyes. I'm shutting down the sabotage protocols. The relief in the room was palpable. Even the Valax officers seemed to relax, though their expressions remained guarded. Mordecai felt a weight lift off his shoulders, only to be replaced by the knowledge that the fight was far from over. Now what? Teresa asked, her arms crossed. Now we figure out how to deal with the faction behind this, Leora said, her voice firm. Because they're not going to stop here. Mordecai sighed, a weary smile tugging at his lips. The fun never ends, does it? Nope, Leora replied with a faint smile of her own. But that's why we're here, right? Right, Teresa said, her tone a mix of determination and resignation. Let's go save the universe again. With that, they turned their attention to the next challenge, the weight of their task heavy but their resolve unbroken. If they were going to stop the insurgents and save everyone on this ship, they'd have to work together. And maybe, just maybe, they'd get through it alive. But knowing their luck, Mordecai wouldn't be betting his next paycheck on it. As they left the command center, the Valax officers exchanged looks, a silent understanding passing between them. They weren't allies yet, but they were something close. For now, that would have to be enough. So, where do we start? Mordecai asked, glancing at Leora. We've got a name, and we've got their location, Leora said, her voice filled with the kind of determination that dared the universe to throw more at them. We shut them down and try to get this peace treaty back on track. Sounds simple when you put it like that, Mordecai quipped, following her lead. Teresa gave him a sideways glance, a small smile playing on her lips. Simple doesn't mean easy, Mordecai. But then, nothing worth doing ever is. Words to live by, Mordecai replied. Or words to die by. They moved with purpose, the weight of their mission pressing down on them like the gravity of a collapsing star. The corridors of the ship were still a chaotic maze, but now they had a clearer direction, a destination that held both danger and hope. As they descended deeper into the ship, Mordecai couldn't help but think that despite the odds, despite the ever-present threat of failure, they had something resembling a plan. And in this universe, that was sometimes the best you could hope for. Because when you were neck-deep in a cosmic mess, armed with nothing but determination and a few laughs, you either found a way to fight through it, or you went down swinging. And Mordecai was nothing if not a fighter. Even if his punches were mostly verbal. Leora led them through another series of corridors, the scanner still guiding them like some kind of faulty yet persistent co-pilot. According to this, our insurgents are holed up in a secure section near the engine room, she said, pausing to double-check the readings. Of course they are, Teresa said with a dry chuckle. Can't have them somewhere easy to infiltrate, like, I don't know, the gift shop? At least this way, if they blow it up, we won't have to worry about souvenirs, Mordecai added, trying to keep the mood light despite the grim situation. They reached a sealed hatch, the final barrier between them and the insurgents' stronghold. Mordecai felt his heart rate spike, the familiar thrill of danger surging through him. It was a feeling he'd grown oddly accustomed to over the years, like an old friend who showed up at the worst possible times. Ready? Leora asked, her hand hovering over the control panel. Ready as I'll ever be to face down a bunch of alien extremists, Mordecai replied, cracking his knuckles. Teresa took a deep breath, her expression focused. Let's finish this. Leora activated the panel, the door sliding open with a mechanical groan that echoed ominously. They stepped through, ready for whatever awaited them on the other side. Inside, the insurgents were waiting. The room was filled with Valax, their expressions ranging from surprise to anger as the intruders burst in. Mordecai raised his hands in mock surrender, the corners of his mouth twitching upwards. Hi, folks, we're here to discuss your impending doom, he said, his voice laced with humor and defiance. The leader of the insurgents stepped forward, their eyes narrowing. "You shouldn't have come here, humans." "Yeah, we get that a lot," Mordecai replied, glancing at Leora. "Got any brilliant ideas?" Leora nodded, her confidence undeterred. "Yeah, let's show them what happens when you mess with the wrong species." With that, the battle began in earnest. Leora and Teresa sprang into action, Mordecai following close behind. The room descended into chaos, a maelstrom of sound and motion as humans and Valax clashed. Mordecai ducked and dodged, his fists flying as he fought with a desperate energy. This wasn't the first time he'd been in a hopeless situation, and it wouldn't be the last. But he had no intention of going quietly into that good night. Beside him, Leora and Teresa were a whirlwind of controlled fury, their movements precise and efficient. They fought like their lives depended on it, because they did. Despite the odds, the tide of battle began to turn in their favor. The insurgents, caught off guard by the humans' tenacity, faltered under the relentless assault. Mordecai seized the opportunity, pressing forward with renewed vigor. "Hey, Leora," he called, ducking a wild swing from one of the insurgents. "Think we're making a good impression?" "Sure," Leora replied, her voice breathless but determined. "Assuming they survive to write the reviews." The fight dragged on, but slowly, the insurgents began to fall back, their resolve crumbling in the face of the humans' unexpected ferocity. Mordecai couldn't help but feel a surge of triumph, a fierce pride in their resilience. Finally, the last of the insurgents surrendered, their weapons clattering to the floor in defeat. Mordecai leaned against a nearby console, catching his breath as the adrenaline faded. "Well," he said, glancing at his companions. "That was fun." Teresa shook her head, a weary smile on her face. "You have a twisted definition of fun, Mordecai." "Comes with the territory," he replied, his tone light despite the exhaustion pressing down on him. Leora surveyed the room, her expression. "Well," Mordecai huffed, glancing around the aftermath of their little skirmish. He wasn't sure if his pulse hammering in his ears was from the fight or the fact that they were one step closer to not being spaced. "That was one way to get our cardio in." Teresa rolled her eyes, brushing imaginary dust off her sleeves. "I'd prefer yoga next time. Maybe less potential for internal bleeding." Leora studied the room with a mixture of satisfaction and worry, her eyes narrowing at the insurgents clumped together, looking like scaly, bruised lumps of regret. "Nice job, team. But don't get too comfortable. This isn't over, is it ever?" Mordecai asked, with a bit too much enthusiasm for someone who'd almost eaten alien knuckles for breakfast. Before anyone could reply, the room filled with an ominous hum, a sound so low it buzzed the bones in Mordecai's skull like a particularly hateful wasp. He didn't like it, not one bit. "What the?" Teresa started before the lights flickered and died, leaving them in the kind of darkness that suggested something had gone catastrophically wrong. Leora muttered under her breath, fumbling with her scanner in the sudden pitch black. "Not now, not now." That's when the emergency lights blinked on, casting the room in garish red, because why not make a bad situation look like a horror scene while you're at it? "Systems are failing," Leora spat, her face illuminated in the blood-red light, giving her an almost demonic glow. Her fingers danced over her scanner like a concert pianist on a tight deadline. "Someone's activated a lockdown." Mordecai sighed heavily, the kind of sigh that said he'd seen enough bad days to open a gallery. "And here I thought we were getting somewhere." The Valax insurgents, beginning to catch on that their luck hadn't just run out but staged a full-blown rebellion, started to squirm, their eyes darting around for an escape that wasn't there. Teresa gave them a hard look, crossing her arms. "Unless you can magically fix this mess, I'd suggest staying put." One of the Valax, looking a little more desperate than the others, tried to edge towards a wall panel. Leora, not missing a beat, leveled her gaze at him. "You really want to make this worse?" The insurgent froze, its scales rippling nervously. Mordecai had to appreciate the irony, aliens having their own little coup while everything around them went to hell. "So, what's our play, Leora?" Mordecai asked, scratching his chin like he was pondering the universe's greatest mysteries, instead of the fact they might soon be space debris. "First off, not dying would be nice," she replied with a weak smile, tapping at her scanner. "I'm trying to reroute control, but they've got some vicious protocol I've never seen before." "Great," Teresa said, deadpan. Just what we need. More alien malware. The Valax guards, who had been observing the whole ordeal like they were watching a particularly engrossing interstellar soap opera, finally stepped in. One of them, with a face that could sour milk, pointed an accusatory claw at them. You, humans, you have brought ruin to this vessel. Mordecai raised his hands, not quite in surrender, more of a universal gesture of, oh, come on, mate. Look, I know it seems bad, but let's not play the blame game just yet. The guard snarled, which, with their anatomy, sounded like someone running a cheese grater over a rusty pipe. You will pay for this sabotage. Us? Sabotage? Teresa scoffed, stepping forward with the grace of a predator. We're the ones trying to keep this floating rust bucket from becoming a cosmic piñata. Leora, ever the diplomat even under threat of imminent execution, tried to reason with them. We're trying to help. The real saboteurs are the ones who locked us all in here. There's a faction on board that's against your peace treaty. We're the only chance you've got. The guard's eyes glinted with suspicion, but there was a flicker of doubt. And how do we know you are not part of this faction? Mordecai exchanged a look with his companions, crossing his arms. Because if we were, we wouldn't be standing here arguing with you. We'd be sipping cocktails on some beach planet while this ship tears itself apart. The guard considered this, his eyes darting between the humans and their restrained compatriots. The insurgents were too busy nursing their bruises to offer much in the way of a rebuttal. Finally, the Valax hesitated. Your words are persuasive. Leora seized the opportunity like a drowning man grabbing a life preserver. Give us a chance to fix this. If we fail, you can execute us all. No hard feelings. Mordecai wasn't entirely on board with that plan, particularly the execution part, but it was better than the nothing they had before. He nodded with what he hoped was reassuring confidence. Yeah, trust us. We're the best dysfunctional team you've got. The guard, still skeptical but apparently lacking better options, gestured for them to continue. Very well. But we will be watching. No pressure then, Mordecai muttered as they turned away, the weight of a species' survival hanging over them like a particularly enthusiastic executioner. Leora led the way, her eyes glued to her scanner as the ship shuddered beneath them, systems flickering like a drunk firefly. There was no time to waste, which, of course, meant they'd waste a lot of it trying not to get killed. So, Leora, Teresa said as they navigated another dimly lit corridor. What's our backup plan if this all goes pear-shaped? Don't have one, Leora replied, too focused to look up. But I hear improvisation is a valuable skill. Great, Mordecai said, we're going to improvise our way out of a lockdown on an alien ship. What could possibly go wrong? As if on cue, the ship groaned like an elderly beast waking from a long nap, the vibrations rattling Mordecai's teeth in a way that suggested he'd need dental work if they survived this. They reached the control hub, a jumble of consoles and wiring that might as well have been a cosmic noodle incident. Leora didn't hesitate, diving into the mess with the fervor of someone who had a serious vendetta against tangled cables. Can you get us out of this? Teresa asked, hovering like an anxious mother over a child's science fair project made of volatile chemicals. Depends, Leora said, her voice muffled as she buried herself deeper into the control panel. Ever defused a bomb while blindfolded and drunk? Not recently, Mordecai said, doing his best to look helpful, which mostly meant staying out of the way and trying not to touch anything important. Then this'll be a fun new experience. The Valax guards watched them with a mix of suspicion and anticipation, as if waiting for either salvation or further proof that trusting humans was about as smart as licking a live reactor. Time dragged, every second feeling like a lifetime as Leora worked, her concentration fierce enough to cut glass. Mordecai and Teresa kept watch, their eyes flicking nervously to the guards, the insurgents, and the flashing lights that seemed to mock them with each pulse. So, Mordecai, Teresa said, breaking the tense silence. If we do get out of this, what's next on your bucket list? He chuckled, though it came out more like as a tense exhalation. I was thinking a nice, quiet retirement. Maybe open a bar. I'd call it the escape hatch. Apt, Teresa said with a grin. I'll take a job as your bouncer. No aliens allowed. They shared a laugh, the kind that was half gallows humor, half genuine camaraderie. It was enough to lighten the oppressive weight of impending doom, if only just a little. Suddenly, Leora straightened, her face flushed with exertion but her eyes alight with triumph. I've got it. Emergency override is disengaged. The ship shuddered again, but this time it felt like a sigh of relief, systems slowly coming back online. The lights flickered to life, bathing them in harsh but welcome brightness. The Valax guards looked at each other, then at the humans with something resembling respect. "You did it," the lead guard said, sounding begrudgingly impressed. "Of course we did," Mordecai replied, his voice casual but his grin wide. "We're humans. We thrive on impossible odds." Leora's smile was tired but satisfied. "Never doubted us for a second." "Well, maybe a second, but it passes quickly." "So, what's next?" Teresa asked, her posture relaxed but still ready for anything. Leora's expression turned serious, the weight of their situation pressing down once more. "We need to secure the ship and ensure the peace talks go ahead. There's still a faction out there trying to ruin everything." "Then let's not give them the satisfaction," Mordecai said, stepping forward with a determination that made him feel like a hero from the stories. "The ones who somehow always made it through, even when the odds were 1,000,000 to 1. With the ship slowly returning to normal, they moved with renewed purpose. The Valax, now more allies than enemies, followed, their presence a silent promise of cooperation. Mordecai felt the smallest flicker of optimism, a candle in the vast darkness of uncertainty. They'd come this far, survived chaos and violence. Now, it was time to finish what they'd started. As they made their way towards the heart of the ship, Mordecai couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they might pull this off. And if not, well, they'd go down fighting. Because if there was one thing he was sure of, it was that humans never went quietly. Not when there was so much at stake. Not when the universe still needed saving. And certainly not when there were jokes left to be made. Mordecai Vance navigated the Valax Dreadnought like a man wading through a sea of broken dreams and faulty wiring. They were knee-deep in chaos, but that was a human specialty, turning chaos into slightly organized chaos, with a side of sarcasm. Leora led the charge, scanner in hand, her eyes flicking between the device and the corridor ahead. Teresa followed, her posture screaming, exasperated yoga instructor, but her eyes sharp, watching for trouble. Mordecai brought up the rear, keeping an eye on the Valax guards shadowing them. They weren't exactly thrilled about their new human allies, but desperate times and all that. "So," Mordecai said, breaking the tense silence, "any bright ideas on how we convince the rest of the ship we're not the bad guys?" "Working on it," Leora replied, still not looking up from her scanner. "If only we had a sign that said, 'Not the saboteurs you're looking for.' Or some cosmic luck," Teresa added. "But that seems to have run out about the same time this ship's warranty did." As if in answer to their troubles, they rounded a corner and nearly collided with a lone Valax technician fiddling with a panel. The alien looked up, 8 eyes blinking in surprise, before squinting at the motley crew of humans and their reluctant escorts. "Who are you?" the technician demanded, voice a confused blend of authority and shock. "Friendly neighborhood chaos managers," Mordecai said with a grin that was more teeth than charm. "And you are?" "Zionkel," the technician replied, still suspicious but clearly intrigued by the human trio. "What are you doing here?" "Trying not to implode with the rest of this rust bucket," Teresa said, crossing her arms. "What's your excuse?" Zionkel hesitated, eyes darting between his panel and the humans. "I'm trying to access the ship's systems. Everything's a mess." "We noticed," Leora said dryly. "Think you can help us get into the main systems? We need to prove we're not the ones causing this mess." Zionkel hesitated, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. "I can try, but it'll take more than just access. The main systems are locked down tighter than a miser's purse." "Sounds like a challenge," Mordecai said. "And we love challenges, right team?" Teresa sighed dramatically, as if we have a choice. With Zionkel leading the way, they moved deeper into the ship. The corridors were a maze of flickering lights and ominous noises, the kind that made you wonder if the ship was haunted by the ghosts of past maintenance workers. It probably was. "So," Zionkel, Leora said as they worked, her fingers flying over the console like she was trying to win an intergalactic typing contest. "Any idea who's responsible for this glorious disaster?" Zionkel's eyes shifted nervously, a sure sign he knew more than he was letting on. "There have been whispers. A group within the crew, unhappy with the peace talks. They think the treaty will weaken us." "Fan-freakin-tastic," Mordecai muttered. Because nothing says strength like blowing up your own ship. Can you give us names? Teresa prompted, her voice low and steady, like she was coaxing a wild animal into a trap. Zionkel hesitated, his scales shifting nervously. I've heard one name. Thalrock. He's been stirring up dissent, but I have no proof. Leora looked up from the console, her eyes sharp. That's enough. If we can get into the system, maybe we can find something to pin on Thalrock. And clear our names, Mordecai added. Before someone decides we're better off as space fertilizer. They worked in tense silence, Zionkel guiding them through the labyrinthine system protocols. It was a race against time, every beep and whir of the console echoing like a countdown to doom. So, Zionkel, Teresa said, trying to break the tension. What do Valax technicians do for fun when they're not saving the galaxy? Zionkel blinked, taken aback by the question. Well, I enjoy collecting hyperspanners. Fascinating, Mordecai said, deadpan. Maybe we can start a club. Humans and aliens against imminent doom. Leora choked on a laugh, and even Zionkel's features shifted into what might have been an amused expression. It was a small victory, but in their line of work, you took what you could get. Finally, with a triumphant beep, Leora leaned back, a satisfied grin spreading across her face. We're in. The screen displayed a dizzying array of data, but Leora navigated it with the precision of a surgeon. Moments later, she froze, her finger hovering over a file. Here it is. Thalrock's been busy. The file contained encrypted messages, plans to sabotage the peace talks, and enough damning evidence to clear their names and point the finger squarely at Thalrock and his merry band of traitors. Well, would you look at that, Mordecai said, his voice a mix of relief and triumph. Looks like the universe finally decided to throw us a bone. Let's not celebrate just yet, Teresa cautioned. We need to get this to someone who can actually do something about it. And who's not planning to execute us, Mordecai added helpfully. Zionkel nodded, his expression serious. Captain Arkin, he's in charge of the peace delegation. If anyone can stop Thalrock, it's him. Then let's pay the good captain a visit, Leora said, her eyes gleaming with determination. Zionkel, you're coming with us. We might need someone to translate all this Valax jargon. The technician nodded, falling into step with them as they made their way through the ship. Behind them, the Valax guards followed, their demeanor shifting from antagonistic to cautiously hopeful. As they moved, Mordecai couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of it all. Here they were, a ragtag team of humans and an alien technician, trying to save a ship from imploding and stop an interstellar war. It was the kind of story you'd laugh at in a bar, if it weren't for the very real chance they'd all end up dead. Hey, Leora, Mordecai said as they hurried down yet another dimly lit corridor. If we do manage to pull this off, I'm putting you up for a medal. Maybe a, most likely to hack alien systems award. Leora snorted, not breaking stride. I'll hold you to that. And if we don't, well, at least we'll go down in a blaze of glory. As long as it's not literal, Teresa added, casting a wary glance at the flickering lights. I've had enough of blazes for one lifetime. They arrived at the captain's quarters just as the ship gave another ominous shudder, the kind that made you question the integrity of the bulkheads. Mordecai took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. Ready? Leora asked, her hand poised to knock. As I'll ever be, he replied, trying to ignore the fact that his heart was doing its best impression of a percussion solo. Leora rapped on the door, and after a tense moment, it slid open to reveal Captain Arkin, a Valax with the kind of presence that suggested he could command a room with a single look. What is this? He demanded, eyes narrowing as he took in the humans and their unlikely companion. Captain, Leora began, her voice steady and authoritative. We have evidence of a plot to sabotage the peace talks. Thalrock is behind it, and if we don't act fast, this ship will be the first casualty. Arkin studied them, his expression unreadable. And why should I believe you? Because we're the ones trying to stop this ship from becoming a floating coffin, Teresa said, her tone as sharp as a blade. And because we have this. She gestured to the data on Leora's scanner. The captain examined the information, his expression shifting from skepticism to grim determination. This is serious. No kidding, Mordecai muttered under his breath. Arkin looked up, his eyes locking onto Leora's. Very well, we will apprehend Thalrock and his followers. But you will remain under guard until this is resolved. Understood, Leora said, relief washing over her features. Just promise us one thing. What's that? Arkan asked, his voice laced with the weight of command. If we survive this, you give us a lift to the nearest planet, Mordecai interjected. Preferably one with a decent bar. The captain's lips twitched into what might have been a smile. Agreed. With that, Arkan turned to his guards, issuing orders with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. The Valax moved with purpose, and for the first time, Mordecai felt a spark of hope. As they watched the captain's men move to intercept Thalrock and his co-conspirators, Mordecai allowed himself a moment of reflection. They were still a long way from safety, but for the first time in what felt like forever, they had a chance. Think we'll make it out of this one, boss? Teresa asked, her voice a mix of hope and exhaustion. Mordecai shrugged, a smile tugging at his lips. I don't know, but if we do, first round's on me. Leora chuckled, her eyes bright with determination. I'll hold you to that. With their fate now in the hands of the Valax captain and his men, all they could do was wait. But as they stood there, surrounded by unlikely allies and the faint hum of a ship slowly returning to order, Mordecai couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, they'd live to tell this tale in a bar one day. Because if there was one thing humans were good at, it was finding a way to survive, even in the darkest of times. And if that didn't work, there was always humor. As long as you could laugh, you weren't beaten. Not yet, anyway. Teresa leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed, a picture of skepticism. So, Leora, what's the plan? Because if it's, sit around and pray, I'd like to know which god we're offending today. Leora grinned, the kind of grin that suggested she was about to do something reckless that would either save them all or get them killed. Typical Leora. Broadcast the evidence, she said, as if it were as simple as ordering takeout from an interstellar diner. Mordecai rubbed his chin. Broadcast it how? This ship's communications are about as reliable as a politician's promises. Exactly, Leora replied. We're going to use that to our advantage. Override the system, force it to play ball. Zionkel, who had been listening with the wary curiosity of someone watching a friend about to swallow a live grenade, finally spoke up. You can't just override Valax systems. They have fail-safes. And if the fail-safes are already failing? Leora countered, her fingers tapping on her scanner with the precision of an assassin assembling a sniper rifle. The sabotage has caused enough chaos that I think we can slide in under the radar. Teresa snorted. So, basically, you're saying we exploit the incompetence of the saboteurs? Exactly, Leora said, nodding. Brilliant plan, right? Mordecai raised a hand. Wait, I just have one tiny, little question. How the hell do we not get ourselves blown up in the process? Leora shrugged, a gesture that spoke volumes about her lackadaisical approach to personal safety. I'm working on that. Wonderful, Teresa muttered, nothing like a half-baked plan when your life's on the line. Zionkel shifted uneasily, his scales catching the emergency lights in a way that made him look like a high-tech Christmas ornament. If we get caught doing this, we won't, Leora interrupted, with the kind of unwarranted confidence you usually only see in drunk gamblers. Because we'll be too busy not getting caught. To Mordecai's surprise, Zionkel seemed to consider this. Whether it was Leora's human charm or the pure insanity of the plan that persuaded him, Mordecai couldn't tell. Maybe it was both. So, Leora said, sliding back into the console with the ease of a racer behind the wheel. Let's get this show on the road. Mordecai watched, slightly awed by the fervor with which Leora attacked the console. Her fingers danced like a virtuoso, each keystroke a note in a symphony of chaos she was conducting with reckless abandon. Okay, Leora said, not looking up. I'm rerouting the power from non-essential systems. Teresa raised an eyebrow. Define non-essential. Lights, gravity stabilizers. You know, the things we can live without for a few minutes. Speak for yourself, Mordecai muttered, feeling his stomach lurch at the thought of floating helplessly around the ship. 0G was not his preferred state of being. Done, Leora said. Now we just need to broadcast the evidence ship-wide and hope that someone in authority gives a damn. Zionkel, who had been watching with a mix of horror and admiration, shook his head. You humans are unique. That's one way to put it, Teresa said dryly. Ready, Leora? Leora took a deep breath, the grin back in place. Ready as I'll ever be. With a flourish, she hit the final key, and the console lit up like it had been possessed by a particularly aggressive ghost. Mordecai braced himself for either triumph or disaster, because with Leora, there was rarely anything in between. The ship's comm system crackled to life, a symphony of static and distorted voices filling the corridors. Leora's fingers danced over the keys, manipulating the system with the finesse of a cat burglar in a jewelry store. "Here goes nothing," Mordecai muttered, watching as the evidence they'd gathered, Thalrock's encrypted messages, the plans to sabotage the peace talks, began to spread through the ship's network like a virus of truth. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Just the sound of the ship groaning around them, the hum of failing systems, the distant echoes of chaos. Then, slowly but surely, the chatter over the comms began to change. "This is Captain Arkin," came the sudden stern voice over the speaker system, cutting through the noise with the sharpness of a guillotine blade. "All crew members, stand down. We have a situation that requires immediate attention." Teresa let out a breath she didn't seem to realize she was holding. "Looks like someone's paying attention." Mordecai grinned. "I guess we can thank Leora for making a compelling argument." Leora just shrugged, looking oddly pleased with herself. "I've always had a way with words. And data." Zionkel, still eyeing the console as if it might explode, nodded. "You've certainly made an impression." The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Valax's security personnel swarmed the corridors, their usually suspicious eyes now confused and intent on following the captain's orders. Whatever Leora had done, it was working. "Think we can actually pull this off?" Mordecai asked, keeping pace with Teresa and Leora as they moved towards the hangar where the captain had ordered them to gather. Teresa snorted. "Is that optimism I hear, Mordecai? Better watch out. It's contagious." "Just trying to fit in," he shot back with a smirk. The hangar was a flurry of activity, Valax soldiers and technicians moving like ants in a kicked nest. Captain Arkin stood at the center, barking orders with the kind of authority that suggested you really didn't want to test his patience. "Ah, our human guests," Arkin said, spotting them with a look that was somewhere between exasperation and reluctant admiration. "Quite the stir you've caused." Leora gave a half bow, as if she were on stage after a particularly dramatic performance. "Just doing our part to not die horribly in the vacuum of space." Arkin's lips twitched, the closest thing to a smile they'd seen from him. "Your efforts have not gone unnoticed. Thalrock and his followers are being apprehended as we speak." "Glad to hear it," Mordecai said. "So, about that lift to the nearest planet." The captain chuckled, a low rumbling sound that seemed to reverberate through the hangar. "As promised, once this is resolved." "And resolved means?" Teresa asked, her voice a cautious mix of hope and skepticism. "Thalrock's trial," Arkin replied. "We will ensure justice is served." "Good," Leora said, still perched at the console like a hawk overseeing its domain. "Because if we have to spend another night in those charming prison quarters, I might actually lose my mind." Mordecai nodded, feeling the tension of the past hours begin to unwind. It wasn't over yet, but they were closer to safety than they'd been since stepping onto this ship-shaped disaster. As the captain moved to oversee the final stages of the operation, Mordecai shared a glance with his companions. They'd done it. Somehow, against all odds and with a plan held together by sheer audacity, they'd turned the tide. "Think they'll let us ride up front when we leave?" Teresa asked, her tone light but her eyes serious. "Knowing our luck, probably not," Mordecai replied. "But hey, at least we won't be leaving in handcuffs." Leora laughed, a bright sound amid the chaos. "I'll take that as a win." And a win it was, Mordecai reflected. In their line of work, even the smallest victories felt monumental. They'd come aboard as potential saboteurs, and now they were leaving as unlikely heroes. Not a bad day's work for a bunch of humans in alien waters. "Hey, Zionkel," Mordecai called, glancing at the Valax technician who had been their reluctant ally. "Thanks for trusting us, even when it seemed like we were certifiably insane." Zionkel bobbed his head, his many eyes blinking in a pattern that Mordecai had come to recognize as a Valax smile. "You've shown me that humans are both resourceful and unpredictable. A dangerous combination." "That's us," Leora said, grinning. "The galaxy's favorite wildcard." As they made their way towards the exit, Mordecai took one last look around the hangar. Despite the chaos, despite the odds, they'd managed to survive another day. And in their world, that counted for something. "So," Teresa said, falling into step beside him, "where to next?" "Wherever the next disaster pays better," Mordecai replied, slinging an arm around her shoulders. And preferably somewhere with a decent bar. With laughter and camaraderie buoying their steps, they left the chaos of the Valax Dreadnought behind, ready to face whatever the universe threw at them next. Because in the end, no matter how grim the dark, there was always light. Even if it was just the light of a bar sign promising cheap drinks and bad decisions. And really, wasn't that what life was all about? The Valax Dreadnought, once a floating pile of scaly chaos and bad decisions, was slowly coming to order. The emergency lights had stopped casting their horror movie red, and proper lighting was back, although, flickering, seemed to be the ship's default setting. The ship groaned like a hungover giant waking up after a particularly regrettable bender, and Mordecai couldn't help but sympathize. Leora, looking as smug as a cat with a mouthful of canary feathers, was holding court amid the controlled chaos of the ship's bridge. Captain Arkin, who had gone from wanting to throw them out the nearest airlock to acknowledging their help, was addressing the bridge crew with the kind of stern authority reserved for headmasters and despotic rulers. With Thalrock apprehended, Arkin intoned, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd spent far too long dealing with idiots, "We can resume the peace talks. Thanks to our human allies, who have somehow managed not to destroy us all in the process." Teresa snorted quietly next to Mordecai. "He makes it sound like that's an achievement. Considering our track record, it kind of is," Mordecai replied. He glanced at Leora, who was now engaged in animated conversation with 8 Eyes, the Valax negotiator who had been watching the proceedings with the air of someone who was perpetually unimpressed. "So, what do we do now, oh fearless leader?" Teresa asked Leora, crossing her arms in a gesture that screamed, skeptic. "We savor victory," Leora said, with the kind of reckless confidence that had become her trademark. "And maybe try to stay out of jail." 8 Eyes' many eyes blinked in a cascade of skeptical amusement. "Your methods are unorthodox." "Unorthodox is just another word for effective," Leora said, shooting the alien a wink that was pure mischief. "Besides, if we did things by the book, we'd be dead. Or worse, bored." Teresa sighed, the sound rich with the kind of resignation that suggested she was used to this sort of nonsense. "I suppose now we just wait for the peace talks to bore everyone into a coma. Or explode," Mordecai added. "There's always that option." "Always the optimist," Teresa said dryly. As they settled into the bridge's uncomfortable chairs, uncomfortable because apparently ergonomic seating was too much to ask for on an alien dreadnought, Mordecai watched the Valax crew hustle into action. They were an efficient bunch, he'd give them that, even if they did look like the result of a genetic experiment gone wrong. Zionkel drifted over, his stance radiating relief. "The chaos seems to be under control. For now." "Control's overrated," Leora said, leaning back with her feet up on the console, like she was lounging in a hammock and not on an interspecies warship. "But thanks. We couldn't have done it without you." Zionkel made a chuffing noise that Mordecai had learned was a Valax laugh. "I merely followed orders. You humans, however, seem to thrive on creating them." "Chaos is our natural habitat," Teresa said with a shrug. "It's what makes us so damn lovable." "Is that what we're calling it now?" Mordecai asked, raising an eyebrow. Teresa just grinned in response. "What can I say? I'm a glass half full kind of gal. Even if the glass is cracked and leaking." Leora stretched, her satisfaction now practically a physical presence in the room. "Well, I think it's high time we head home and collect our hero badges." "You mean head back and hope they don't throw rocks at us," Mordecai corrected. "Semantics," Leora said with a dismissive wave. "Anyway, Captain Arkin says we can hitch a ride as soon as the peace talks are underway." "And here I thought we'd be here till we grew scales," Teresa said. "Scales would be an improvement," Mordecai said, glancing at the scaly, bruised Valax insurgents being led away under heavy guard. "Might even make us look tougher." Leora chuckled. "Or itchy." The bridge's main viewscreen flickered, showing a tactical display of the ship and its surroundings. The Valax system was slowly coming back online, each successful reboot a testament to either the crew's skill or sheer luck. Possibly both. 8 Eyes, still hovering nearby, finally spoke, his voice a smooth rumble that matched his negotiation skills. "Once the peace talks resume, your presence will be acknowledged. Your actions speak loudly." "That's one way to put it," Mordecai said, watching Leora shoot the alien negotiator a cheeky grin. 8 eyes regarded them with an expression that was unreadable thanks to all the eyes. Do not mistake this for approval of your methods, but understand that your results have merit. High praise coming from someone who probably thinks we're all insane, Teresa said with a wry smile. Mental instability can be a form of genius, 8 eyes replied. Or so I am told. Mordecai leaned back, feeling the tension seep out of his muscles. They'd survived, and that was no small feat. In a galaxy where the wrong move could get you spaced, surviving was the same as winning. As the crew continued to work, Leora studied the tactical display with the focus of a gambler watching the final spin of a roulette wheel. This could be a new beginning, she said, her voice uncharacteristically serious. For us, for the Valax, for everybody. Or a very quick ending, Mordecai said, not willing to let go of his cynicism just yet. Leora shrugged, a twitch of her shoulders that spoke volumes. I've always been a fan of happy endings. Happy endings are for fairy tales, Teresa said. And last I checked, we're not in one. But we're not dead, Mordecai pointed out. And in this line of work, that's as close to a happy ending as we get. Teresa nodded, the ghost of a smile playing on her lips. Guess we'll have to settle for not being dead. Settling is underrated, Leora said, standing and stretching like a cat. Especially when the alternative is floating aimlessly in space. As the peace talks resumed, gradually, and with the kind of cautious optimism that suggested nobody really believed it would work, the human delegation found themselves hailed as unlikely heroes. Which was a lot better than the alternative, being ejected into the void. Captain Arkin, now in full diplomat mode, was doing his best to wrangle the chaos into something resembling order. The treaty will be signed, and your part in this will not be forgotten, he intoned, as if to convince himself. Guess that means we've earned ourselves a place in the history books, Leora said, her grin wide and unrepentant. Or a wanted poster, Teresa muttered under her breath. Depends on how things pan out. As the talks dragged on, because interstellar diplomacy had all the speed and excitement of a snail race, the human crew found themselves momentarily at peace. Or something like it. Think we'll get commendations for this? Mordecai asked as they lounged near the back of the bridge, watching the proceedings with the detachment of outsiders who knew they had no real stake in the outcome. Commendations, coffee, who knows? Leora replied. Might even get a medal if someone's feeling generous. Teresa snorted. And if they're not? Then we get bragging rights, Leora said, not missing a beat. Which, between us, is worth more than any shiny bit of metal. Mordecai shook his head, still amazed at how they'd come out on top. If top was the right word. Just another day in the life, I guess. Another day in the galaxy's biggest disaster, Teresa corrected. And we somehow managed to walk away. As the Valax Dreadnought finally stabilized, its systems humming back to life one by one, there was a sense of relief in the air. It was a victory, albeit a small and hard one. But in the end, wasn't that the best kind? All right, Leora said, pushing herself up and surveying their ragtag group with a commander's eye. Let's get ready to head back. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of playing hero. Mordecai nodded. I hear that. Let's go home before we get roped into more heroics. Teresa rose, dusting off her clothes as if she just finished a particularly dirty job, which wasn't far from the truth. Here's hoping the next mission's a little less life-threatening. So, no mission at all, then? Mordecai quipped, earning a laugh from Leora. As they prepared to leave the Valax Dreadnought, Mordecai took one last look around. The ship, for all its alien architecture and strange crew, had become a place of unexpected allies and strange victories. Think we'll be back? Teresa asked, catching the look in his eye. Maybe, Mordecai said, his tone one of reluctant fondness. But if we do, let's make sure it's on better terms. Leora grinned, her smile infectious. Deal. Now let's get out of here before someone decides they need more human help. With final goodbyes to the Valax, who were now as much allies as they were potential enemies, the human crew boarded their shuttle. It was still held together by willpower and prayers, but for once, they didn't mind. As the shuttle lifted off, leaving the Valax Dreadnought behind, Mordecai settled into his seat with a sigh. Another day, another near-death experience. And a step closer to peace, Leora added, her tone far more hopeful than it had any right to be. Here's to the next disaster, Teresa said, raising an imaginary glass. Mordecai grinned, feeling something like contentment settle over him. May it pay well and come with a good story. As they sped through the void, the vast galaxy stretching out before them, one thing was certain. The universe was a big, chaotic place, and they were just crazy enough to survive it. And in the grimdark expanse of space, that was all anyone could really ask for.